Greetings everyone. How are you? It's a Jamaican Tory back with you again as we prepare to discuss another aspect of the constitutional reform process as the JLPNP continues in their attempt to usurp our constitutional monarchy and replace it with their republic. I'm asking you all to please like, share, and subscribe as we get into this discussion. Well, today's topic, even though I will be discussing the subject of monarchy, as I always do, I will be somewhat pivoting from our usual discourse to talk about the subject of neo-colonialism. Question is, why would I talk about neo-colonialism? Of all things, why that subject? Well, in terms of the arguments that have been made by anti-monarchists over the years, one of the strongest arguments that they have made is the fact that the monarchy is a remnant of a colonial institution, and that by remaining with the monarchy, then Jamaica is more or less a neo-colonial state, and therefore the only way to stop being a neo-colonial state is to become a republic. That argument sounds seemingly logical to the uninitiated. However, some events have come to light, not necessarily here in Jamaica, but in other countries, particularly in the African diaspora, that has really caused us to examine the logic behind this argument. And I speak specifically of what's happening in the West African country of Niger. I don't know how many persons have been following that, where there has been a coup in Niger, where the government of Niger has been overthrown and been replaced by a military junta. And the reason why I want to bring up the events in Niger is because of what has been going on in Niger for many years before that. Niger was formerly a French colony, and after the French left Niger, they continued to be heavily involved there, especially as far as the economics is concerned. Even though Niger and many other former African colonies of France uses what is called the CFA franc, a currency that is linked to formerly the French franc and now to the euro. And what that means is that these countries for a very long time have not had any monetary sovereignty, which of course stands in stark contrast to many former British colonies who, upon independence, decide that, you know what, they are going to have their own monetary sovereignty in their own hands. Of course, we know that in our case, yes, we gained independence in 1962, and even though we didn't switch over to our dollar until 1969, so it took us a few years, like what, 7 years to finally get our own currency. But the fact of the matter is, the decision was in our own hands. It wasn't pushed or it wasn't compelled to us, compelled by anyone and imposed on us. What is happening right now in Niger and even in its neighbor Gabon, who also has now followed suit with Niger, what it does, it shows that there is a wind of change coming as far as neo-colonial exploitation is concerned. And here's what I mean by neo-colonial exploitation. Now, these countries have a lot of natural resources. And even though they have these resources that should be used for the betterment and development of the people, because of the conditions that France imposed on these countries, they are not able to do so as they would like, because many of the profits from the extraction and use of the resources go into the pockets of foreign companies, most of them either French or American companies, which then means that as far as the development of the economies of the countries are concerned, it is very minuscule. Bearing in mind, these are very wealthy countries. And when I say wealthy, I don't mean wealthy in terms of GDP per capita. I mean wealthy in terms of their sheer natural resources. And they cannot use these things to their advantage because of the conditions that have been imposed upon them, and not just imposed upon them, but conditions that their leaders over the years have been compliant with. Because make no mistake, in many of these countries, the leaders or the so-called leaders of these countries have been compliant, and they have been made very wealthy by their compliance, but at the expense of the people. And this is something that is seen not only in Niger, but also in many other former French colonies in Africa who are still economically linked to their former colonial master, which is France. Bear in mind that France has not had a proper monarchy since the revolution of 1848. And I use those words deliberately because, personally speaking, like any good monarchist, I don't consider the house of Bonaparte to be actual monarchs. They are usurpers. Napoleon the First, Napoleon the Second, quote unquote Napoleon the Third, they're not emperors, real emperors. They are usurpers. And so we on this side, in the monarchy world, or pro-monarchist world, sorry, we only consider capuchins as the rightful rulers of France. So we don't count Napoleon III in the 1840s and 50s. So the last monarch, as far as we're concerned, is Louis Philippe. And some might even go as far as to say Charles X from 1830, when they had the final fall of the Bourbon dynasty, or the Bourbon line of the Capuchin dynasty. And of course, as royalists, we do one day hope for the restoration of a proper monarchy in France, whether it is a legitimist or an Orleanist. Either way, we don't mind. We just want to see the fall of the Fifth Republic. But that's on a side. Back to the main issue at hand. Issue at hand, yes. So, as I was saying before I went off on that little rant, France has not had a proper monarchy since 1848, which means that a lot of the latter colonial exploitation that France has engendered has been under the auspices of the Third, Fourth, and Fifth Republics. And the reason why I include the Fifth Republic is that even though France has formally let go of its colonies informally, it is still controlling the economies of many of these countries. Even our next door neighbor, Haiti, who we know overthrew French rule in a revolution in 1801, in many ways is still being exploited by France. And the same thing with a lot of other colonies or former French colonies. Why am I bringing up this in talking about neo-colonialism? What does this have to do with the monarchy? Now, in terms of what is to be considered neo-colonial rule, now let me give you two examples. So, what did the French do? They gave the former colonies paper independence in the fact that they have all their political institutions that are their own. So now they have their own president, they have their own Supreme Court, they have their own parliament. They don't have to share any ruler with France because France has gotten rid of their monarchy a long time ago. So they don't even have to acknowledge the French president as, anything in their state. But at the same time, what they also do is that they impose economic conditions on these countries that make it hard for these countries to develop themselves. So that's one. Compare that to what's happening in a lot of former British colonies, where some of them choose to continue acknowledging the British monarch as their head of state. Notice I said choose because it was imposed on them by the British government. You can either stay in or you can choose to get out, which of course is something King Charles said at the Commonwealth Summit last year. And I soon touch on the Commonwealth in a bit. So we see that, yes, they do that, yes. But at the same time, as far as the economy is concerned, they don't have currencies that are tied to the pound. They don't have resources that are being exploited by UK colony, British companies, to means of treaty or stuff like that. What is true is that some former British colonies are more developed than others, and some are more beholden to foreign powers than others. Let's face it, many of the former British colonies that are in that situation, the outside companies that are exploiting them are American companies, not British companies. Let's be honest. So, which is a more telling sign of neo-colonialism? One, where you have paper independence but economic exploitation, or another where you share a common head of state but at the same time the ability to control all your economic and social affairs is entirely in your hands. Now, the answer is obvious. Obviously, having paper independence, and when I say, well, first of all, we have some quote-unquote independence, per se, but having your own head of state, but also having to have your economic affairs controlled by your former colonial master, that is far more neo-colonial than simply having to share a common head of state, but each country gets to decide its own economic and social policy. Now, on the subject of the Commonwealth, which I touched on earlier, what you tend to find is that when a lot of British colonies in Africa, when they got their independence, a lot of them chose to join the Commonwealth. They didn't have to join. They could be like the United States or Ireland who decide that they're not joining any Commonwealth. And they choose not to join the Commonwealth. then that's their right. Some of them have even withdrawn and returned, like for example, South Africa or Zimbabwe, for example. Again, it's a voluntary organization. But what I find even more telling is the presence of certain countries that were never under British rule. Some of them are actually under French rule, like for example Rwanda and Togo. Rwanda is a very prominent former French colony that is now, come to think of it, let me backtrack, I think it might be Belgium, but either way, it was a part of the British Empire. But they have chosen voluntarily to join the Commonwealth. Togo, definitely a former French colony. Again, they have chosen voluntarily to join the Commonwealth. Nobody forced them to join. Nobody put any conditions on them to join. If they choose to leave tomorrow, they can choose to do so. Now, what is the point of all of what I'm saying here? What I'm trying to do is to paint a picture of how true neo-colonialism is done, and then contrast it with the myths and the misconceptions that are being told by Republicans for a political agenda by accusing the monarchy of being neo-colonial, while at the same time the French and their Fifth Republic, let me not jump the gun here, their Fifth Republic, which is actually exercising neo-colonial policies on a daily basis, the anti-monarchists don't criticize them for their neo-colonial policies. And the question is why? What is their agenda? And it's a rhetorical question. We know what their agenda is. And because we know what their agenda is, then it is high time that we point out these things so that persons are not fooled by the use of terms. Because let's be honest, neo-colonialism, that's a real thing. I'm never going to sit here and say that neo-colonialism doesn't exist. But it is the Republican governments in the world that are practicing neo-colonialism. Primarily France, but let's be honest, another primary practitioner of neo-colonialism is the United States. And we see this through the control of institutions like the IMF, the World Bank, the WTO, all these other multilateral institutions, many of which are used to control the economies of former colonies that have now become independent in law. But in fact, the economies are controlled by outside entities, are attempted at being controlled by outside entities. That is the true face of neo-colonialism. And blaming the monarchy for neo-colonial exploitation, to me, is just plain and utterly ridiculous.